Hey there, soil enthusiasts. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I first started gardening. You're not really growing plants, you're growing soil. I know that sounds backwards, but once this concept clicked for me, everything changed. My tomatoes got juicier, my herbs more fragrant, and my flowers more vibrant. Today, I'm sharing everything I've learned about creating truly exceptional soil right in your own backyard. And trust me, your plants are going to thank you for it. Before we dive into the how-to, let's talk about what good soil really means. When I started gardening, I thought soil was just dirt, maybe with some fertilizer thrown in. But good soil is actually a living ecosystem teeming with billions of microorganisms, perfectly balanced minerals, organic matter, air pockets, and moisture. It's less like dirt and more like a bustling underground city where everything works together to feed your plants. Good soil has three critical qualities: proper structure, balanced nutrition, and active biology. The structure needs to be loose enough for roots to penetrate easily, but firm enough to support plants. It should drain excess water while retaining enough moisture for plant needs. Nutritionally, it needs to provide all the macro and micronutrients plants crave. And biologically, it should be alive with beneficial bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that help plants access nutrients. Get all three right, and you've created something truly magical. The foundation of great homemade soil starts with understanding what you're working with. I always begin by assessing my native soil texture. Grab a handful of moist soil and squeeze it. Does it form a tight ball that won't break apart? That's clay-heavy soil. Does it fall apart immediately and feel gritty? That's sandy soil. Does it hold together but crumble easily? Congratulations, you've got loamy soil, which is the gold standard. Most of us don't start with perfect loam, and that's completely fine. I spent my first 3 years gardening in heavy clay that dried into concrete in summer and turned into a swamp in winter. The key is amending what you have rather than fighting against it. For clay soils, you'll focus on adding materials that improve drainage and create air pockets. For sandy soils, you'll add materials that increase water retention and nutrient holding capacity. Understanding your starting point determines your amendment strategy. If I could only use one amendment for the rest of my gardening life, it would be compost, hands down. Compost is decomposed organic matter, and it's the closest thing to a miracle ingredient that exists in gardening. It improves soil structure regardless of whether you're dealing with clay or sand. It adds nutrients slowly and steadily. It introduces beneficial microorganisms, and it costs absolutely nothing if you make it yourself. I started my first compost pile 5 years ago with kitchen scraps, grass clippings, and fallen leaves. Now I have a 3-bin system that produces more compost than I can use. The process is beautifully simple. Layer green materials like kitchen scraps and fresh grass clippings, with brown materials like dried leaves, straw, and shredded paper. Aim for roughly a 3-to-1 ratio of browns to greens. Keep it as moist as a wrung-out sponge, turn it occasionally to add oxygen, and in 3 to 6 months, you'll have rich, dark, earthy-smelling compost that transforms any soil. When incorporating compost into your soil, I generally mix in about 2 to 3 inches across the top of my beds and work it into the top 6 to 8 inches. For potting mixes, compost can make up about 20 to 30% of your total volume. Watch what happens over the following weeks as your soil becomes darker, more crumbly, and more alive. While compost is fantastic, diversifying your organic matter sources creates even better soil. I love using aged manure from local farms, which adds nutrients along with organic matter. The key word here is aged. Fresh manure can burn plants and introduce pathogens. Well-aged manure from herbivores like horses, cows, or chickens that's been sitting for at least 6 months is garden gold. Leaf mold is another favorite of mine that doesn't get enough attention. It's simply leaves that have decomposed into a dark, crumbly material. I rake leaves every fall into a separate pile, wet them down, and let them sit for a year or two. The resulting leaf mold improves soil structure beautifully and is particularly wonderful for moisture retention. It doesn't add many nutrients, but it creates an incredible habitat for beneficial fungi. Coconut coir is my go-to for container gardening and seed starting mixes. It's sustainable, holds moisture exceptionally well, and has a perfect fluffy texture. I also incorporate worm castings whenever possible. These are essentially worm poop, and they're loaded with beneficial microbes and slow-release nutrients. A little goes a long way. Even 10% worm castings in a potting mix makes a noticeable difference. One mistake I see beginners make constantly is creating soil that's just too dense. Plants need oxygen at their roots just as much as they need water and nutrients, you know? I actually learned this the hard way when I lost an entire bed of peppers to root rot, all because my lovingly crafted soil held too much water and not enough air. For garden beds, I like to incorporate perlite or even coarse sand to improve drainage in heavy soils. Perlite is those little white volcanic glass particles you see in potting mixes. They create permanent air pockets that really don't compress over time. I usually add about 10 to 15% perlite by volume to my homemade potting mixes. For in-ground beds, I've found that simply avoiding compaction makes a huge difference. I never walk on my growing beds, always working from pathways. I also practice no-till gardening as much as possible, adding amendments to the surface and letting worms and other soil life incorporate them naturally. This preserves the soil structure and the network of fungal threads that help plants access nutrients and water. Okay, so here's where things get a bit more technical, but stay with me because this really matters. Most plants actually prefer soil with a pH between 6 and 7, which is just slightly acidic to neutral. At this range, nutrients are most available to plants, making it easier for them to thrive. I test my soil pH every spring using an inexpensive soil test kit, and I adjust as needed. Now, if your soil is too acidic, you can raise the pH by adding lime. Personally, I use dolomitic lime because it not only raises the pH, but also adds calcium and magnesium. On the other hand, if your soil is too alkaline, which is actually pretty common in arid regions, you can lower it by adding sulfur or using acidic organic materials like pine needles or peat moss. It's really important to make adjustments gradually over time, rather than trying to swing the pH dramatically all at once. Beyond pH, plants need a whole range of minerals to stay healthy. A comprehensive soil test from your local extension office will tell you exactly what your soil needs. I do this every 2 to 3 years, and honestly, it's been incredibly enlightening. For example, I discovered my soil was deficient in calcium, which totally explained why my tomatoes kept getting blossom end rot. A simple addition of gypsum solved the problem completely. This is where your soil truly comes alive. The soil food web is, the complex community of organisms living in healthy soil, from bacteria and fungi to protozoa, nematodes, and larger creatures like earthworms. These organisms break down organic matter, make nutrients available to plants, suppress diseases, and improve soil structure. To support this community, I focus on keeping my soil covered with mulch, adding diverse organic materials, avoiding synthetic chemicals that harm beneficial organisms, and minimizing soil disturbance. I also make compost tea by steeping finished compost in water and aerating it for 24 hours. This liquid is teeming with beneficial microorganisms, and I use it as both a soil drench and foliar spray. Mycorrhizal fungi deserve special mention here. These beneficial fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, extending their reach and helping them access nutrients and water. You can purchase mycorrhizal inoculants to add to your soil, or you can encourage native populations by avoiding tillage and maintaining organic matter levels. For container gardening, you'll want to create a specialized mix since, honestly, regular garden soil is just too heavy for pots. My go-to recipe is roughly 40% high-quality compost, 30% coconut coir or peat moss, 20% perlite or pumice, and 10% worm castings. This creates a mix that drains well, holds moisture, and provides excellent nutrition. I also add a handful of organic fertilizer per cubic foot of mix. My favorite blend includes alfalfa meal for nitrogen, rock phosphate for phosphorus, and kelp meal for potassium plus trace minerals. This gives plants a steady supply of nutrients over the growing season without the risk of burning roots like synthetic fertilizers can. Here's the truth about soil. It's never done. Great soil isn't something you create once and forget about. It's an ongoing relationship. Every growing season, I add a fresh layer of compost. I rotate crops to prevent nutrient depletion and disease buildup. I plant cover crops in my off-season beds to add organic matter and protect the soil from erosion. I've also learned to observe what my soil is telling me. Are earthworms abundant when I dig? That's a great sign. Does the soil smell earthy and rich? Perfect. Do plants grow vigorously with deep green leaves? Your soil biology is thriving. These observations guide my amendments and management decisions far more than any rigid schedule. Making exceptional soil isn't complicated, but it does require patience and attention. The beautiful thing is that soil improves year after year as you continue adding organic matter and supporting the soil food web. The soil I'm working with now bears no resemblance to what I started with, and every season it gets even better. Remember, healthy soil creates healthy plants which create healthy people. It all starts beneath our feet with the foundation we build. Your journey to amazing soil starts today, with whatever you have available. Start composting, add organic matter support, soil life, and watch the transformation unfold. If this guide helped you understand how to create incredible soil at home, subscribe to Grow with Soil for more practical growing wisdom. Share this with fellow gardeners who want to improve their soil, and let's grow something amazing together. Here's to getting our hands dirty and building the best soil possible.